China may be manufacturing and exporting everything from needles to cars around the world, but it still lacks something that only the United States possesses. On April 2, 2025, American President Donald Trump appeared before the media at the White House holding a large red card. This red card listed the names of several countries along with their respective tariff rates. President Trump read out the rates country by country, and with that, a wave of fear spread across the globe. Stock markets around the world, including in the U.S., crashed. This was a clear sign of a looming conflict, a conflict where the weapon would be power and the ammunition, money. Yes, we can call this a trade war or a tariff war. Donald Trump made a strategic move that could bring the world's most powerful trading nation, China, to its knees. If this trade war happens, the big question is, who will have the upper hand, China or America? Welcome once again to Explore TV's video. Viewers, to fully understand this issue, let's first talk about tariffs. Many people think tariffs are taxes imposed on other countries, but in reality, they are a form of import duty that applies only to products being imported into the U.S. For example, if the U.S. imposes a 26% tariff on India, it means that goods coming from India will be taxed 26% upon entering the U.S. According to Trump's list, Pakistan had a 29% tariff, and China was at the top with a 34% tariff. Imposing tariffs or import duties is not something unusual. In fact, if we look at the same list, India already imposes a 52% rate on the U.S., Pakistan imposes 58%, and China imposes 67%. The purpose of tariffs isn't to earn money by taxing foreign products. Rather, it's a strategy to protect local industries. For example, Harley-Davidson, a premium American motorcycle brand, faces a 100% tax when imported into India. Suppose a model costs 1.5 lakh rupees. If India didn't impose this tax, it would be sold at the same price as a locally manufactured Royal Enfield. Given the choice between the two at the same price, most customers would prefer the American bike. This would hurt India's local motorcycle industry. So, by imposing tariffs or import taxes, foreign bikes are made deliberately expensive. There are several benefits to this approach. Firstly, tariffs help keep the local industry running. Secondly, they save foreign exchange. Obviously, anyone importing an American bike will have to send U.S. dollars to the U.S., which will reduce India's foreign currency reserves. Now, since the tariffs have been imposed by the U.S., it means that goods coming from other countries into the U.S. will be taxed, making them more expensive. As a result, their sales in the U.S. will decrease, and consumers will prefer to buy products that are locally manufactured. For instance, textiles from India and Pakistan are sold in American markets, but the same textiles can also be produced locally in the U.S. Due to these tariffs, countries like India and Pakistan will likely see a decline in their textile industry's sales. However, the country that will be most affected by Trump's tariffs is China. In fact, many say China was Donald Trump's primary target. This is because, up until the year 2000, American products dominated global markets. The position China holds today used to belong to the U.S. But over time, China attracted global business, not just from the U.S., but from the entire world. Today, even the smallest items are manufactured in China and exported worldwide. Thanks to cheap labor, Chinese products are extremely affordable and highly competitive in international markets. Globally, China has flooded the world with its products, which has led to a decline in many local industries. Take just the trade between the U.S. and China. In 2000, the U.S. imported $80 billion worth of goods from China, while China imported only $10 billion worth from the U.S. Fast forward to 2025. And now, the U.S. imports $440 billion worth of goods from China annually, whereas China only buys $145 billion worth from the U.S. Donald Trump argues that trade should be balanced. If the U.S. is buying $440 billion worth of goods from China, then China should also buy the same amount from the U.S. There's currently a gap of $295 billion. This imbalance is known as the trade deficit. To reduce or eliminate this trade deficit, Donald Trump has targeted China. The result? Chinese imports, especially smartphones, will become significantly more expensive in the U.S. Among these, Apple iPhones are particularly notable. Though Apple is an American company, its phones are manufactured in China. Once these products become costlier due to tariffs, the industries responsible for their production may shift back from China to the U.S. This is exactly what Donald Trump wants, but China doesn't. Just consider that almost all of Apple's products, from iPhones to Apple Watches, are primarily made in China. In addition, Tesla cars, Dell and HP laptops, Nike and Skechers shoes, Logitech and GoPro accessories, Black & Decker and Stanley products, and even toys from American companies like Mattel and Hasbro are manufactured in China. If all these companies were to shut down their plants in China and bring production back to the U.S., America would reduce its imports from China by around $200 billion annually. That would shrink the trade deficit from $295 billion to just $80 or $90 billion. However, while this would certainly benefit the U.S. on one hand, it would also increase production costs significantly. As a result, these products would become more expensive, and eventually, the same companies would bear the financial burden. Still, it seems Donald Trump is determined to break China's monopoly, no matter the cost, even if the damage falls on the U.S. itself. On the other hand, China isn't willing to let that happen either. That's why, when Trump raised tariffs on Chinese goods, China retaliated by increasing taxes on American products. The situation has now escalated into what can only be described as a trade war. Neither the Chinese president seems ready to back down, nor does Donald Trump show any sign of compromise. Both countries have imposed so many tariffs on each other that a $10 product from China now ends up costing nearly double in the U.S., and the situation is similar in China with American goods. The real question now is, which of these two powers holds the upper hand? In this trade war, the country that can endure the pressure the longest will ultimately come out on top. If we take a closer look, the U.S. mainly imports tech-related items from China, like mobile phones, laptops, electronics, and toys. Even if the U.S. stops importing these for a while, it won't make a huge difference. And if the same items are sourced from other countries, they might just cost a little more. But China imports one particular product from the U.S., without which it would be extremely difficult for China to manage. Yes, and this very product could create serious problems for China in the coming months. Let's understand how. China's total population is 1.41 billion. That's 315% more than the U.S. population. Naturally, feeding such a massive population requires a large amount of food, with the most basic staples being wheat and rice. However, the issue is that only 13% of China's total land area is arable farmland. That means there's only 0.23 acres of farmland available per Chinese citizen. Most of this land is used to grow wheat and rice to avoid relying on food imports for basic sustenance. But these are just the basic items. Pork is consumed in huge quantities in China, so much so that China has the highest pig farming numbers in the world. As per 2024 records, China had over 400 million pigs, more than the entire human population of the U.S. The global pork demand is one thing, but China's pork consumption stands on its own. Naturally, feeding 400 million pigs also requires something substantial. Their diet consists of corn for sugar and soybeans for protein. Their feed typically includes 60% corn and 40% soybeans. While 80% of China's corn needs are fulfilled domestically, the remaining 20% has to be imported, mainly from Ukraine. But soybeans are a different story. China imports them almost exclusively from the U.S. and Brazil. Each year, China imports 50 million tons of soybeans from the U.S. alone just to feed its pigs. And sourcing this product from elsewhere is extremely difficult because soybeans are not a very profitable crop for farmers. An acre of land yields only about 1,500 kilograms of soybeans, whereas corn yields around 6,000 kilograms per acre. This crop is only viable in places where there's a large amount of unused land, like the United States. That's because the U.S. has a relatively small population and a vast amount of land. On average, each American citizen has access to about 1.25 acres of land, which is approximately 400% more than what a Chinese citizen has. This is exactly why the U.S. not only meets its own food requirements, but also has enough land left over to grow soybeans for export to China. Of course, feeding those 400 million pigs also requires something. Their diet includes corn for sugar and soybeans for protein. Their feed consists of 60% corn and 40% soybeans. 80% of the corn is produced in China, while the remaining 20% has to be imported from Ukraine. However, soybeans are a product that is imported solely from the U.S. and Brazil. Every year, China imports 50 million tons of soybeans from the U.S. alone to feed its pigs. It's very difficult to source this product from other places because soybeans are a crop that doesn't give farmers much profit. 1 acre of land yield, however, soybeans are a product that is imported solely from the U.S. and Brazil. Every year, China imports 50 million tons of soybeans from the U.S. alone to feed its pigs. It's very difficult to source this product from other places because soybeans are a crop that doesn't give farmers much profit. 1 acre of land yields only 1,500 kilograms of soybeans, while corn yields around 6,000 kilograms per acre. This crop can only thrive where there is an abundance of unused land, like the United States. This is because the U.S. has a relatively small population and a vast amount of land. On average, an American citizen has about 1.25 acres of land, which is 400% more than what a Chinese citizen has. For this reason, the U.S. not only meets its own food requirements, but also has enough land left to grow soybeans and export them to China. It's not that pigs only eat soybeans. China had already anticipated this risk and experimented with alternatives in their feed, such as canola seeds. These are cheaper than soybeans, but are harder to digest, requiring more food to be given, which increases the overall cost. Peanuts or sunflower meals, but they don't contain as much protein as soybeans, which means extra supplements have to be added, further increasing the costs. Currently, China is experimenting with farming insects and using those insects to feed the pigs, thus meeting their protein requirements. However, this experiment is still in the testing phase. Additionally, China is a by-trade surplus country, meaning that the products made in China cannot just be consumed domestically. In order to survive, China must sell its products to the world. The biggest drawback of a trade surplus economy is that they have a lot to lose. On the other hand, the U.S., being a consumer market, has numerous options to buy from. If they don't buy from China, they can source products from other countries to meet their needs. During his previous administration, Donald Trump had already imposed tariffs on China, and it was clear that China suffered as a result. And this time, similar expectations are there. Trump holds all the cards to potentially blackmail China, and China is probably fully aware of this. While this video was being produced, news broke that Trump had raised tariffs on all other countries to near 90% name. Like and subscribe, thanks.